They locked him with the feral alien girl as punishment. Then the unexpected happened. The roar of the Xylos crowd was a physical weight, a wave of sound that vibrated in Damien's bones. He stood in the center of the rust-colored arena, his chest heaving, the recycled air thick with the metallic tang of blood. At his feet, the Syndicate's prizefighter, a four-armed brute, lay groaning, one hand clutching a dislocated shoulder. His stun baton hung heavy in Damien's grip, its power cell humming with unused potential. "Kill him!" The voice of Vorlog, the pit boss, cracked through the arena's sound system, a wet, guttural command. The crowd echoed the sentiment, chanting for the finishing blow. Damien looked down at the defeated Xylos warrior, whose multifaceted eyes, clouded with pain, held a sliver of pathetic terror. This was the part of the show that Damien had come to loathe, the gratuitous, final act of dominance that the Syndicate demanded. Damien looked up, his gaze finding the obsidian and gold dais where Vorlag sat. The pit boss was a massive, corpulent Xylos, his purple skin glistening under the harsh lights, his two lower arms resting impatiently on his gut. He made a sharp throat-cutting gesture. Damien's gaze dropped. His hand, slick with his own sweat, subtly brushed the seam of his blue fatigues, feeling the small, foil-wrapped square hidden there. His last emergency item. He took a slow breath, his mind made up. He turned his gaze back to the beaten warrior. Then, with a deliberation that felt like a lifetime, he opened his hand. The stun baton clattered onto the sand. A profound, absolute silence fell over the arena. It was a vacuum, more shocking than the previous roar. This, his human defiance, was not the violence they had paid to see. It was an act of non-compliance, so alien to their culture of brutal dominance that it was a greater insult than any weapon. Vorlag rose from his dais, his face darkening from purple to a shade of bruised black. "You deny the crowd blood, human?" His voice boomed dangerously low. "A waste. You were a high-grade data tech human, worth more on a console than in the sand. But your spirit," he spat, "it is an insult to my business, a financial disruption." "You deny them blood?" Vorlag roared. "Then you will give them blood." The command was absolute. Two heavy-armored guards stormed the arena, grabbing Damien's arms in a vice-like grip. They ignored the defeated fighter, who was already being dragged off by medical drones. Damien didn't struggle. He kept his intense brown eyes locked on Vorlag as the guards hauled him from the sand, past the cheering crowd, and into the dark, stone-slick corridors beneath. Vorlag followed, his heavy footsteps echoing. He was taunting him, his voice laced with the sadistic pleasure of a being in total control. "A special match, human. Your softness is a disease. I thought breaking your hands in the pit would break your mind. I was wrong. It only cost me a valuable asset." They marched down a hall Damien had never seen, one that stank of mold and old fear. They stopped before a solid steel door, its surface slick with an oily grime and pitted with dents from something inside. Vorlag gestured to the door with a sneer. "A new match. We give this cell a new toy every few weeks. None last the night." He leaned in, his foul breath washing over Damien. "She's a true primal, feral. Broke the last 3. We give her toys to see how long they last. She enjoys it." The guards laughed. One of them slammed a heavy fist against the door's activation panel. With a shriek of tortured metal, the heavy slab of steel slid sideways, revealing a yawning pitch-black maw. "Enjoy the show," Vorlag spat. The guards shoved Damien hard. He stumbled over the high threshold, catching himself on the rough stone floor. The heavy door sealed behind him with a final, booming clang, plunging him into absolute darkness. The lock's pneumatic hiss was the last sound he heard. He was alone. The air was thick, suffocatingly close, and carried the heavy animalistic musk of a predator and the sharp, acidic scent of fear, his own. Damien pushed himself backward, his hands scraping the grimy wall, until he felt the cold, unyielding steel of the door at his back. He held his breath, straining his ears, his human senses struggling to adapt. He could hear nothing but the frantic pulse of his own blood. Then, from the deepest corner of the cell, a low, guttural growl began. It was a sound that vibrated not just in the air, but from the floor itself, a promise of violence. A pair of luminous, vibrant green eyes snapped open in the dark. They were watching him. The lunge came with no other warning. Felice was a blur of contained fury, a flash of green skin and orange hair exploding from the darkness. Her black claws, extended and deadly, were aimed for his throat. He hadn't tried to counter. He'd thrown himself sideways, rolling against the wall, his shoulder slamming into the stone. Her black claws slashed the air, one set raking his forearm as he twisted away, drawing a sharp line of fire and blood. He scrambled into a crouch, shielding his head, his hands held up, palms out, empty. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble, even as blood dripped from his arm. His reaction, his complete lack of aggression even after being wounded, confused her. She had landed in a low, predatory stance, a perfect killing machine of sleek, powerful limbs. She hissed, a sound like tearing canvas, and backed away, her movements fluid and utterly silent. She didn't turn her back, but retreated into the far corner, a coiled spring of terror and aggression. Her long, furred orange tail lashed the dusty floor, the only part of her that seemed agitated. Her large green eyes, with their wide, shocked pupils, never left him. Through the thick steel of the door, muffled laughter was audible. 2 minutes, a guard yelled, his voice distorted. "He's dead! Pay up!" Damien stayed perfectly still, his back against the wall, letting his breathing slow. He kept his hands visible. He was the intruder. He was the threat. He had to prove he was neither. After several long minutes, a loud clang made Felice jump. A narrow slot near the floor opened with a pneumatic hiss, and a single gray nutrient block slid onto the gritty floor. It landed in the no-man's land between them. Felice eyed it, her body tensing, a low growl resuming in her chest. She looked from the food to Damien, expecting him to lunge for it. Slowly, so slowly it was almost painful, Damien got to his knees. He didn't look at the food. He looked at her. He held her gaze, a steady, non-threatening contact. Then he put one hand flat on the floor and with his fingers pushed the entire gray block across the rough stone, sliding it until it was well within her reach. He retreated to his wall, sat down with his legs crossed, and rested his hands on his knees. He waited. This was the first unexpected act. He had given away food. He had given away the only resource in the cell. She stared at the food, then at him. She snarled, a sharp, disbelieving sound, convinced it was a trick. But he made no move. He just sat, his dark brown hair a mess, his expression calm. Her hunger eventually won out over her suspicion. In a single, lightning-fast motion, she snatched the block and retreated to the deepest shadow of her corner. She ate it with her back pressed into the angle of the walls, her teeth tearing at the dense block, but her wide, luminous eyes never left his face. She was a trapped animal, and he, for now, was a confusing element in her cage. Hours passed. The dim, ambient light of the prison barely penetrated the cell, leaving them in a deep, perpetual twilight. Damien's muscles ached from the tension of his confinement. The gash on his arm had stopped bleeding, but it throbbed. He broke the silence. "My name is Damien." His voice, low and calm, echoed in the small space. She reacted with a violent hiss, as if the sound of sapient speech was a physical attack. She bared her teeth, and her black claws, which he now saw were retractable, clicked as they extended. He fell silent again, accepting the boundary. He wouldn't push. Patience was the only weapon he had. A long time later, the clang of the food slot sounded again. Another gray block slid onto the floor. Felice tensed, her eyes fixed on the block. She expected the same routine. But this time, Damien moved. He crawled forward, retrieved the foul gray prison block, and carried it back to his spot. He looked at it, then at her. Her tail twitched. Then, Damien reached into the seam of his blue fatigues, into the small pocket he had sewn there himself. His hand emerged, holding a small, foil-wrapped bar, the ration he had saved for a true emergency. This was it. He unwrapped the gray block and took a bite, chewing the flavorless, gritty paste. He made a point of showing her he was eating. Then he slid the ration bar across the floor to her. This act, this moment of self-deprivation, shattered her composure. She stared at the shiny wrapper. He had given her the better food. He had kept the prison slop for himself. This was not the behavior of a dominant male, a captor, or a fellow prisoner trying to survive. This was something else. She inched forward, her movements far more hesitant than before. She sniffed the bar, her pointed green ears, fuzzed with a lighter lime-green fur on the inside, swiveled toward him, listening. She snatched the bar and retreated. This time she didn't just eat, she watched him. She saw him calmly inspect the fresh, bleeding gash on his own arm, the wound from her attack. He winced, then tore a strip of cloth from the hem of his own pants and began to wrap it, his face calm. Her growl had softened. The sharp, feral edge was gone, replaced by a low rumbling sound of pure, unadulterated confusion. A routine formed in the oppressive gloom. 6 hours of silence, 1 gray nutrient block. 6 more, another block. Damien continued his pattern. He would eat half of 1 block and push the other half plus the second full block to her. He was slowly, deliberately conserving his energy to give her the strength. And he talked. His voice became a constant, low presence in the cell. He didn't ask her questions, didn't demand a response. He just spoke. He told her about Earth, a place he hadn't seen in a decade. He described the concept of a sky, a vast open blue space, so different from the oppressive stone ceiling above them. He talked about rain, the feeling of water on skin that wasn't recycled sweat or prison grime. She remained silent, but her behavior changed in increments so small he was afraid to acknowledge them. The hissing stopped. The growls faded. When he spoke, her pointed green ears would pivot, tracking his voice. One day, he was tracking time by the food deliveries. A profound shift occurred. He was sitting against his wall. He'd been dozing, a dangerous but necessary risk. He woke with a start, his senses screaming. She was sitting against the same wall. Not close. She was still several feet away, her knees drawn up, her orange hair a cascade over her shoulders. But she was no longer in her corner. She had chosen to put her back to the same surface as him. It was an unspoken, passive gesture of trust. She was no longer treating him as a threat from the front, but as a potential ally at her side. He didn't say anything, he didn't move. He just let his breathing return to normal, and after a long moment he began to speak again, his voice softer this time, telling her about the color of his blue fatigues and how it matched the sky he'd been describing. Their fragile truce was not what Vorlag wanted. The pit boss's voice suddenly blasted from a hidden intercom, the sound so loud it made them both jump. Felice was on her feet in an instant, her back arched, claws out. "This is not a pairing," Vorlag's voice roared, laced with fury. The betting pool was dead. The feral beast hadn't killed the human, and the human hadn't tried to dominate the beast. Useless! He won't kill it, and it won't kill him. Fine. Let's give the pet a reason to fight. There was a loud, grinding sound of stone on stone. Damien's eyes shot around the cell. A hidden panel in the center of the floor, one he hadn't known was there, was retracting. Felice screamed. It wasn't a growl, not a hiss. It was a high-pitched, piercing shriek of pure, unadulterated terror. She scrambled up the thick bars of the cell's small window, a window that led only to a dark service corridor, and clung there, her green body trembling. From the new hole in the floor, a creature of jointed, armored plates and too many legs emerged. A sand crawler, a low-card nuisance beast used to warm up the crowds. It clicked its mandibles, its multiple dull eyes swiveling, and it immediately fixed on the softest target. It turned on Damien. The sandcrawler lunged. Damien didn't panic. He ripped off his blue fatigue shirt, a flash of color in the gloom. "Here!" he yelled, waving it. He used the bright color to draw the creature's attention, backing into a corner, his mind racing. He had no weapon. The walls were smooth. He was trapped. The creature feinted, then lunged again, its heavy, clawed forelegs slamming down where he'd been. Damien dodged, his bare, wiry torso slick with a sudden sweat. He was using his human agility, his ability to think in 3 dimensions, but he was outmatched in strength. The beast cornered him, raised its legs for a crushing blow. A whoosh of air and a streak of orange and green cut through the cell. Felice dropped from the bars. She was not the terrified creature from a moment before. Her attack was a blur of lethal, calculated precision. She landed on the creature's back, her black claws sinking deep into the softer gaps between its armored plates. This was not a feral rage. This was surgical, warrior-like skill. She used her weight and leverage, twisting her body, and with a sickening wet crunch, she severed its main nerve cluster. The sandcrawler collapsed, its legs curling in. It was dead. She stood over its corpse, her chest heaving, her body taut. Her hands, her forearms, were slick with the creature's dark ichor. Damien, shirtless, pushed himself up from the corner. He looked at her, not with fear, but with a profound, staggering awe. That was... He will send more. Her voice, it was a ragged, unused rasp, thick with disuse, but they were words. Damien froze. He stared at her, his mind resetting, the feral act, the growls, the hissing. You can speak. She nodded, and the first true emotion he'd seen from her crossed her face. It was not rage. It was shame, deep and agonizing. She looked at the dead creature, then at him. They, like the feral girl. Her words were broken, the grammar of a language she hadn't used in a long, long time. They do not listen. She gestured to the cell, to the corpse. They fight. So I fight. The other prisoners, the other toys Vorlog had sent her, had tried to dominate her. They had met her survival-driven rage with their own, and they had died for it. Damien was the first to offer peace. He took a slow step toward her. She flinched, her instincts still screaming. He stopped. He wasn't seeing a beast. He wasn't seeing a pet. He was seeing her, a warrior, a captive, a survivor. He raised his hand, palm out, just as he had in the beginning. He moved slowly, giving her every chance to retreat. Felice, he murmured, using the name he had heard the guards call her. She flinched at the sound of her name, but she didn't pull away. He stopped, his hand just inches from her face. His fingers were steady. She was taller than him by a head, a fact that was only now truly apparent. Her large green eyes, luminous and wide, were fixed on his. His fingers gently, tentatively touched her cheek. Her green skin was warm, smooth. She trembled, a violent shudder that ran through her entire body. They will not hurt you again, he said, his voice raw with a new, protective intensity. He met her gaze, and the world narrowed to the two of them in this dark, filthy cell. We will not let them. The we changed everything. It hung in the air between them, a new, fragile, and incredibly dangerous thing. The air crackled, charged with an intensity that had nothing to do with violence, and everything to do with the raw, desperate connection of two souls in a cage. The dynamic of the cell was reborn. They were no longer prisoner and beast. They were partners. The feral girl was a lie, a mask. Beneath it was Felice, a highly trained warrior from a people the Xylos had clearly underestimated. And Damien, the soft human, was a high-grade data tech with a mind that saw patterns. Vorleg, Damien stated, his voice quiet as he salvaged a cleaner piece of cloth from his ruined shirt. He's a gambler. All Xylos are. It's not just a hobby. It's their entire social structure. Status is measured by the risk of the wager. We use that. Felice was pacing the cell, her long, fluid strides restless. Use how? We are here. He is out there. He's watching, Damien said, nodding at the dark circular lens of the single grimy camera mounted in the corner. He's furious. He sent the crawler to get a show. He got one, but not the one he wanted. He saw you kill it. He saw me hide. I hid, she admitted, the shame returning. My people do not hide. Mine do, Damien countered, pressing the cloth to the still weeping gash on his arm. We call it tactics. You were terrified. That was real. But you still fought. You protected me. Now, we give them a different show. They began to train. To the guards watching through the camera, it was the most perverse and fascinating show in the syndicate. The human was taming the beast. A new betting pool, sicker than the last, started among the guards. When will he mount her? But the reality of the cell was a covert exchange of skills. He'll come at you from the side, Damien explained, standing close, his body pressed against hers, his hand on her green-skinned waist. A Xylos always leads with his upper left arm. It's a feint. Watch the lower right. His touch was electric. He was all wiry muscle and focused heat. Felicia's breath hitched. Her people had no casual touch. Contact was for combat or for mating. This was something in between. She shivered, and it had nothing to do with fear. Your stance, she corrected him, her voice a low rasp. She repositioned his feet with her own, her leg pressing against his. Too wide. You are off balance. She taught him her people's combat forms, a graceful, lethal martial art that relied on leverage and speed. Their training was intensely physical, a necessary intimacy in the suffocatingly small cell. His hands corrected her grip on a piece of stone she was using as a blade. Her hands moved over his shoulders, showing him how to block a four-armed strike. "The roars, they are louder, more often," Damien whispered one day after listening to the sounds from the arena for an hour. "They're building to something, the championship." He would tend to the scrapes she got from her own ferocious practice, his breath warm on her neck as he dabbed at a cut. "Still," he would murmur, his voice a vibration against her skin. She, in turn, found herself fascinated by the human. His mind was a strange, layered thing. He wasn't the strongest, he wasn't the fastest, but he planned. "Tonight," he said, his voice barely a whisper, his mouth close to her pointed ear. "It has to be tonight. The whole complex will be watching. All bets will be on Vorlog's champion. He'll be distracted." "The door is steel," she countered, her own body humming with a new, strange energy. "But the lock is electronic," Damien whispered back. "It's an old cell. The wiring on these old cells is sloppy. A data tech can feel it." He showed her a thin, sharpened piece of chitin he'd salvaged from the sand crawler, hidden in his boot. "It's a gamble, but it's the only one we have." The night of the Grand Championship arrived. The entire complex thrummed with the energy of a capacity crowd, the roars from the arena vibrating through the stone. This was it. "Now," Damien said, his voice calm. Felice stood guard at the door, her entire body a coiled spring. Damien knelt by the locking mechanism, his hands working with the sharpened piece of chitin. He jammed it into the seam, feeling for the contacts. A blue spark. A hiss. Nothing. "Again," Felice urged, her tail lashing. "Wait for the roar," Damien whispered. He was listening, timing the crowd's reaction to the champion's entrance. The sound peaked, a deafening wave. Now, he jammed the chitin against the contacts. There was a loud sizzle, a flash of white light, and the heavy pneumatic lock hissed open. They were out. The corridor was dim, lit by flickering emergency-level lights. Two Xylos guards were 20 yards down, their backs to them, their attention focused on a small, wall-mounted screen showing the arena feed. Felice moved. She was not a beast. She was a shadow. Before the guards could even register the sound of the cell door, she was on them. It was not a fight. It was an execution. Two silent, precise strikes to the back of their necks. They crumpled without a sound. Damien was already moving past them. "Control room, this way." He led them down a maze of service tunnels, his memory of the sounds he'd heard proving perfect. They reached a small, reinforced door labeled betting control. "Locked," he said. Felice didn't wait. She braced herself and slammed her shoulder into the door. It shuddered. "Again," Damien said, adding his own weight. They hit it together. The lock bar splintered. The room was empty, just as he'd predicted. A single, low-level technician was slumped over a console, passed out, a bottle of illicit Kithra brandy at his side. The walls were covered in screens, all showing the arena. Felice stood guard at the ruined door, her green eyes scanning the corridor. "Hurry, Damien." Damien slid into the chair. His fingers flew over the Xylos script console. This was his humanity. Not empathy, not patience, but pure, cold, human logic. He was a data tech, and this was his arena. Got it. Primary betting ledger, accessing Vorlog's personal account. He didn't just steal, he was more insidious. He's all in on his champion, a massive wager. Damien's fingers keyed a rapid sequence. And void. He canceled the bet. Now, let's reroute. He took the full sum of Vorlog's liquid assets and placed an even larger wager against Vorlog's champion, flagging the system's own corruption detection protocols. "This isn't just an escape, Felice," he said, a cold smile touching his lips. "It's his ruin." A high-pitched, piercing alarm blared through the complex. "Main system tampering," Damien spat, jumping from the chair. "He knows." The fight to the central control dais was a blur of brutal, close-quarters combat. They were in the main concourse now, and alarms were chaos. Guards were running, but they were running toward the perceived threat in the betting room, not expecting to meet it in the hall. Felice was a whirlwind of green and orange. She moved with a grace that was terrifying, her claws and feet a seamless weapon, disabling, disarming, and dispatching guards with a ruthless efficiency. She was a trained warrior, and she was unleashed. Damien was not. He was a survivor. He stuck to her flank, his human mind her tactical computer. "Left! Too low!" he'd call out, and she'd spin, her tail whipping a guard's legs out from under him before she finished the one in front. He grabbed a fallen guard's stun baton, the same weapon he'd discarded, and used it with a desperate, unglamorous proficiency. They were a single two-person unit, his mind, her body. They fought their way to the obsidian and gold dais, the very heart of the arena, now empty, as Vorlog was marshalling his personal guard. Damien slammed his hand on the lockdown panel. A heavy steel mesh gate dropped, sealing them in. "That won't hold him long," Felice panted, her green skin flushed, her body slick with sweat. "It doesn't need to," Damien said, jumping onto the main broadcast console. His fingers flew. He wanted a show. He found the evidence of his own tampering. The voided bet, the new wager, all flashing red and flagged by the system as high-level corruption. With a single keystroke, he broadcast it. He sent it to every screen in the arena, to the cheap seats, to the guards' lounge, and most importantly, to the luxury boxes where Vorlag's rivals and syndicate superiors were watching the match. Pandemonium erupted. The roar of the crowd changed. It was no longer a cheer for the fight, it was a howl of outrage. They had been cheated. You ruined him," Felice whispered, staring at the screen. "We did," Damien corrected. A deafening boom rattled the dais. Vorlog. He was outside and he was using a breaching charge. The door buckled, the metal screaming. This was it. Felice turned, putting her back to the console, to Damien, her claws extended, ready to meet the end. "This was a good plan," she whispered, her voice tight. "It's not over," Damien said, his voice a low growl. He spun her around, he grabbed her, his hand tangling in her long orange hair, the other gripping her jaw. He pulled her into him, his body all lean muscle and desperate energy pressing against hers. He kissed her. It was not a kiss of love, not of tenderness. It was hard, dominant, and desperate. It was a raw, possessive claim in the face of death, a brand of fire. It was all the fear, all the rage, all the unspoken electric tension of their confinement unleashed in a single bruising moment. It was a human act of possession, a promise that if they died as one. The door exploded inward. Vorlog, his face a mask of purple-black rage, stormed into the room, flanked by 6 of his elite, 4-armed personal guards. "You," he bellowed, his eyes fixing on Damien. "The soft human, the broken tech, you. He had no words for the financial ruin he'd just witnessed. "Kill them!" Slowly. The guards flooded the room. Felice met them. She unleashed. This was not a silent, stealthy attack. This was a warrior's rage. A battle cry screamed in her native tongue. She was a blur of motion, her claws, her feet, her tail, all moving at once. She ducked under the swing of one guard, using his own body as a shield against another, her claws finding the soft tissue under their multiple arms. Damien was not a warrior, but he was a survivor, and this was his console. He slammed his fist on the arena controls. "Fire suppression! Zone dice!" A thick chemical foam began to pour from the ceiling. "System-wide static," he yelled, hitting another panel. Every screen on the dais went to white noise, the sound a deafening shriek that made the Xylos guards roar in pain, their sensitive hearing overloaded. Chaos. In the fog, in the noise, they were just 2, Damien and Felice, back to back. Vorlag, blind with rage, finally saw Damien. He lumbered through the foam, all 4 of his massive arms swinging. "I'll tear you apart!" Damien dodged the first 2 swings, but the third, a brutal backhand, sent him sprawling. The stun baton skittered away. Vorlag raised all 4 arms for a crushing blow. Felice was occupied, fighting 2 guards at once. Damien was alone. He couldn't win with strength. He had to win with ingenuity. He saw the stun baton lying in a growing puddle of foam near a sparking, damaged console. As Vorlag lunged, Damien rolled, grabbing a downed guard's taser from his belt. "Hey, Vorlag," Damien yelled, scrambling backward. "You're a bad bet!" Vorlag roared and stepped forward, right as Damien fired the taser into the foam-covered floor at his feet. The entire puddle of foam lit up, the electrical charge conducting instantly. Vorlag's massive 4-armed body went rigid. He vibrated, a deep groan escaping his throat, before he collapsed like a felled tree, smoke rising from his wet skin. Silence. The foam dripped, the static shrieked. Felice stood over the last 2 guards, her chest heaving. She walked over to the twitching, spasming form of the pit boss. Her black claw extended, and she placed it gently on his throat. She looked at Damien. He met her gaze, his own breathing ragged. He heard the sound of heavy armored boots in the concourse, syndicate security, or maybe rivals, coming to see the wreckage. "He's not worth it, Felice," Damien said, grabbing her arm. "He's ruined. They'll do the rest." She hesitated, her rage at war with his logic. Her claw twitched, wanting blood. Then she spat on the spasming pit boss, a final, vicious gesture of contempt. She turned and took Damien's hand. "Now," she said, "we go." They were on a landing pad, the cool, metallic-tasting air of the upper levels a shock after the arena's filth. Behind them, the complex was in open, screaming riot. They had stolen a small two-person shuttle, its ramp open and waiting. The shuttle blasted into the black, silent void of orbit. The adrenaline, the all-consuming fire that had burned in them for days, began to fade, leaving an aching, hollow-feeling exhaustion. They were both bruised, bleeding from a dozen shallow cuts, and impossibly alive. The final scene. The cockpit was small, the quiet hum of the autopilot the only sound. Damien was in the co-pilot's seat, his shirt gone, his body a map of fresh and old bruises. Felice was in the pilot's, her hands, her claws, still resting on the controls as if afraid to let go. He reached into a medical kit he'd found. He pulled out a sterile wipe and a tube of synth skin. He unbuckled and knelt in the small space between their seats. He took her arm. She flinched but didn't pull away. There was a long, deep gash on her green-skinned forearm. His touch was different now. It was not the practical, hurried touch of training. It was not the desperate, claiming grip of the kiss. It was reverent. He cleaned the wound, his thumb brushing her skin. "They looked at you like a beast," he murmured, his voice low, his brown eyes fixed on his task. She watched him, her large, luminous green eyes tracing the line of his shadowed jaw. "All I see," he said, looking up, his gaze locking with hers, "is you." He finished with the wound, but his hand didn't move. It slid from her forearm to her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. He brought her hand to his lips, gently kissing her dark, clawed fingertips. She shivered, a response that was deep and primal. Her feral nature, the mask she had worn for so long, was gone. But the wildness, the raw alien hunger, that was real. And his calm, his softness, was the most dangerous thing she had ever encountered. He stood, pulling her gently from the pilot's seat. He unfastened the high collar of his blue fatigues, the last remnant of his prison, and let it fall to the floor. She watched him, her pupils dilating, the bright green of her eyes darkening to a deep forest shade. He was right. They hadn't listened. They hadn't looked. They had seen a feral girl and a soft human. They had never seen the warrior, and they had never seen the man. He lowered his head, his mouth finding the sensitive skin just below her pointed ear. She made a sound, a low, purring growl that was no longer a threat but an invitation. They were alone, free and in control. The story the Xylos had tried to write for them had ended. This was the true, unexpected event. A new pack of two, forged in defiance and fire, and their story, a raw, intense, and deeply romantic union, was just beginning. Epilogue. A low, steady hiss of water was the only sound. It was clean water, hot, and it felt like a miracle. Damien stood in the small, sterile cubicle of the hab unit, his back to the shower, his hands braced on the tiled wall. The steam was a warm, wet cloud, and he let it soak into him, a poor substitute for the ache in his bones. He was clean. They were both clean. It was the third time he'd showered in 2 days, as if he could scrub the grime of the arena, the scent of the cell, from his skin. It wasn't working. The water shut off. He heard her step out, the musical drip-drip of water on the floor. He'd given her the first shift, an unspoken rule they'd established. He grabbed a thin gray towel and stepped out, rubbing it over his short, dark hair. Felice was standing by the room's single, reinforced viewport, already wrapped in a simple, dark cloth. Her long, brilliant orange hair was a damp cascade down her back, the color a shocking, vibrant contrast to her smooth green skin. In the dim, ambient light of Port Cathal, she was a living flame. She was staring at the endless flow of ships, her body tense, her furred orange tail giving a low, anxious twitch. He walked up behind her, not touching. "You can't stand guard forever, Felice." "I do not know how to stop," she whispered, her voice still holding a slight rasp, but it was a rasp of intimacy now, not disuse. He had a tube of medical-grade analgesic in his hand. "Turn." She obeyed, her luminous green eyes, no longer wide with feral terror, watching him with a new, profound intensity. A long, dark bruise was healing on her shoulder, a last reminder of a guard's stun baton. He uncapped the tube. His touch was slow, methodical as he worked the salve into her skin. His fingers were sure, his touch reverent. This was the same skin he had first touched in fear, the same skin he had gripped in the throes of their escape, the same skin he had claimed in the frantic, desperate consummation of their freedom. Now his touch was simply care. "Does that hurt?" he murmured. "No." Her voice was a breath. A shiver ran through her, and it had nothing to do with the cold. His fingers traced the faint, swirling patterns on her shoulder, patterns he was only now learning were as unique as his own fingerprints. He was learning her, the topography of her body, the map of her scars. He leaned in, his lips brushing the place he had just healed. It was a kiss of ownership, of reverence, of a promise to protect. Her long, black claws, which she kept meticulously clean, slid from their sheaths, and she rested her hand on his chest, right over his heart, not as a threat, but as a claim. Her tail, her restless, agitated tail, now curled slowly around his ankle, a possessive, gentle anchor. "We need food," he said, his voice a low rumble against her skin. "Real food." "I am hungry," she agreed, and the double meaning in her words made his breath catch. The main concourse of Port Thal was a sensory overload. It was a river of species, a chaotic, thrumming artery of the galaxy's underbelly. The air stank of spiced oils, metallic exhaust, and the unscrubbed scent of too many biologies in one place. Neon script in a dozen languages flickered, advertising noodle bars, data brokers, and bioenhancements. For Damien, it was just a crowd. For Felice, it was a nightmare. She walked half a step behind him, her warrior's instincts screaming. Every being that jostled her, every loud, barking laugh, every sudden movement made her tense. Her pointed green ears were pinned flat against her head, her green eyes darting, tracking a dozen threats at once. Her claws, her beautiful, lethal claws, kept slipping out and retracting. She was a weapon in a place that didn't want a weapon, and she was terrified. Not of the fight, but of the messy, unpredictable peace. Damien was her anchor. He was a rock in the chaotic stream. He didn't hold her hand, didn't try to comfort her. He simply moved with a calm, unshakable confidence, his human adaptability his greatest shield. He was just another spacer, in simple gray fatigues, his gaze level, his presence unremarkable. He was her shield, her buffer, the soft human who could navigate this world of noise in a way her warrior self could not. He stopped at a small stall run by a six-limbed insectoid, the air thick with the smell of sizzling meat. He ordered in the universal broken trade cant, his voice calm, his stolen credit chip ready. "Too many," Felice whispered, her back against the stall's outer wall. "Too loud." "I know." He took the hot, skewered meat and a small, steamed bun, handing the bun to her. "But they aren't looking at us. They aren't looking at you. They're just living. We can do that, too." He was teaching her not just how to fight, not just how to survive, but how to be. She took the bun, her hand trembling, and bit into it. The taste was alien, warm, and real. They were walking, Damien guiding her toward a quieter alcove when he stopped. He was looking at a large, public-access news terminal. On the screen, a Xylos broadcaster was speaking, his four arms gesturing, and behind him Damien recognized the symbol, the skull and baton of Vorlag's fighting syndicate. "What is it?" Felice asked, sensing his change in posture. "Shh," he turned up the audio translator. "And the full, chaotic collapse of the Qatar fighting ring," the translator buzzed, "which authorities are now attributing to a massive internal power struggle. The pit boss, Vorlag," the screen showed a hollow image of Vorlag, not dead, but in heavy, magnetized chains, his face a mask of ruined fury, was apparently brought down by his own rivals. Sources cite unprecedented financial corruption and system-wide ledger tampering that triggered a complete loss of confidence from his backers. Felice stared, her food forgotten. She looked from the image of the ruined, enchained Vorlag to the calm, steady profile of the human standing next to her. "The hostile takeover," the announcer continued, "was reportedly initiated after anonymous data leaks proved Vorlag was actively cheating his own partners." She looked at Damien. He was just watching the broadcast, his face impassive, but a small, cold, utterly satisfied smile had touched his lips. You did this, she said, her voice filled with a staggering awe. It wasn't a question. I fought the guards. I was ready to kill him. But you... She struggled for the words. You killed the idea of him. He built a house of cards on a foundation of blood, Damien murmured, his brown eyes still on the screen. All I did was show everyone where he'd cheated. They did the rest. She finally understood. She had seen her people fight. They were strong, proud, but they were conquered. She had seen the Xylos fight. They were brutal and they were strong. But in the cell, she had seen this human. He was not the strongest. He was not the most brutal. He was the most dangerous. His soft human ingenuity, his patience, his ability to see the system and make it eat itself, that was his strength. It was a power she had never known existed. She reached out, and in the middle of the crowded concourse, she took his hand. Her clawed, green-skinned fingers laced with his. It was a public, defiant act, not of ownership, not of submission, but of partnership. He glanced at their joined hands, and his small smile softened. He squeezed her fingers. Come on, let's go home. The door to the HAB unit sealed, and the chaotic noise of the port was silenced. The room was small, but it was theirs. It was safe. The adrenaline of their escape was gone. The fear of the crowd had faded. The victory of the news broadcast was sinking in. All that was left was them. Felice moved first. She pushed him not gently against the wall, her hands flat on his chest. It was a mirror of their very first fight, a mirror of their desperate, claiming kiss on the dais. But this was neither. This was something new. Her luminous green eyes were dark, the pupils wide, her expression one of burning, possessive intensity. They put you in that cell as a punishment. Yes, he said, his voice low, his hands finding the curve of her waist. They thought you were weak, she breathed, her voice a low, husky purr. A soft human, food for the beast. Her claws traced the line of his jaw, a feather-light touch that did not cut. They were wrong, he whispered. Yes. She rose on her toes, her body all sleek, powerful, green-skinned grace, pressing against his. The cloth wrap was a flimsy barrier between them. He was not the beast. I was. She touched her forehead to his, a gesture of profound trust. And you were not my tamer. She pulled back just enough to look him in the eyes, her truth, her choice laid bare. You are my mate. The word, her word, hit him like a physical blow. The feral girl, the warrior, the survivor, had not just accepted him. She had chosen him. He didn't answer in words. His hands moved from her waist, one tangling in her still damp, brilliant orange hair, the other sliding down her back, splaying across her hip, pulling her impossibly closer. He was claiming her, not as a prize, but as his equal, his partner. The kiss was not the desperate, bruising claim of the escape. It was a slow, deep, devastating exploration. It was the taste of her, the scent of her, the defiant, living fact of her. It was the culmination of every shared glance in the darkness, every whispered plan, every shared breath in the face of death. Later, they were a tangle of limbs on the simple, narrow cot. The universe, in the form of a million distant stars, streamed past the viewport. Where do we go? She asked, her voice muffled, her head resting on his chest. Her pointed, furred ear twitched as it rested over the steady, slow beat of his heart. He was silent for a long time, his hand idly stroking her hair. Your people, he said finally. You said they were captured, scattered. Yes, she murmured, a shadow of pain in her voice, the Xylos and others. They take us. They think we are. Beasts, he finished, his voice hard. We find them, he said. We cannot fight a syndicate, Damien, she said, lifting her head. I am one warrior. You are one, mind. We just did, he countered, his brown eyes meeting hers in the starlight. And we didn't just fight them, we broke them. He turned to the small, second-hand data slate he'd bought with Vorlog's credits. And now, thanks to the Qatar Syndicate's public data purge, I have a lead, a shipping route out of a quarantine world, a route that belongs to the same people who first sold you to Vorlog. It's a start. She looked at him, at this quiet, unassuming human who had toppled a criminal empire with a few keystrokes and an unshakable will. She saw the future. It was not a future of running. It was not a future of hiding. It was a future of hunting. We, she agreed, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. It was the first true smile he had ever seen from her. It was terrifying. It was beautiful.